I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so about the outcomes from COP, and then hopefully there'll be a little bit of time for any questions or clarifications. Obviously, this is COP is a very big and complex thing that can't be summarized completely in 20 minutes. So, it's going to be subjective. I would welcome, any other comments anyone might have. So let me just share my screen. So this is what I'm going to cover. COP26 in Glasgow, the Conference of the Parties, the 26th version of that. But I'm also going to talk about the net zero strategy, which was effectively the UK government's formal submission to COP26. And it's the first plan that the UK government has had to how it's going to meet its targets to halve emissions by 2030 and eliminate them by 2050. So I think there's some more relevant stuff in there at a local level than some of the broader things that happened at COP. Speaking about COP, so there's a few kind of big messages that have come out of that. One of those you might have heard is this idea of keeping 1.5 alive. So this idea of working towards 1.5 degrees and trying to keep our ambitions to reach that target possible. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Another useful thing that came out of COP was one of the reasons it was a significant COP and a lot of attention paid for it, not just the fact that it was happening in the UK, so we heard more about it, but also COP was the first COP since COP15 in Paris, where you probably heard of the Paris Agreement, where it was agreed that countries would have to submit their targets and their plans to reach net zero to keep us towards that 1.5 target. So those targets were called nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, and the plan was that countries would review them every 5 years. Now, having reviewed them at Glasgow, the fact that they weren't getting as close as they needed to be to 1.5, there's been a request for those to be renewed next year. So rather than every 5 years, now on an annual basis. So we'll wait to see exactly how many countries meet that request. It's not a demand, it is a request. But that is a significant outcome, which means that we'll hear more and more about how countries are planning to meet the targets that have been set. And thirdly, there were a few pledges that were made at COP26 around methane, deforestation, coal, finance. I'll share more information about those in the follow-up email, but I'm not going to go into them in any detail today, partly because they don't have that much direct relevance at a local level, and partly because they are just pledges. They are not actions. So time will tell what happens as a result of those. So I'm going to talk a bit more in detail about some of the things that I think are really interesting and important to reflect on from COP. So one of these is this idea of 1.5, and there's two important things to note here. So this is a really good graph from the excellent carbon brief. I'll share a link to this as well afterwards, which is showing, okay, so if you tally up all of the commitments that have been made by the various countries in 2020, before COP this year, at COP this year, and then add in as well the net zero promises that countries have made, this is what people are estimating is going to be the outcome of those. So you can see on the far right, the most optimistic assumption is that we might hit 1.8 degrees. And yes, so two things to note here. One, that 1.5 degrees is not a safety net. It's not a good outcome. It's not something we are aiming for because it will be fine. We're at 1.1, 1.2 degrees at the moment, and we're already seeing significant impacts in this country, in other parts of the world, and we're seeing what's happening in British Columbia at the moment. So 1.5 degrees is not everything is fine. And it's important to note that it's not really a target. It's just a point at which the scientific consensus suggests above that will bring catastrophic impacts. And the other thing to note is that these numbers, we often talk about them in shorthand as being quite definite, but actually there's a lot of uncertainty in here. This is the best data that we have, but it's not an exact science. It's predictions, it's modeling. And even here, you can see on the graph underneath the temperature, there's a temperature range, which is showing the uncertainty range within that particular temperature. So the prediction that we might hit 1.8, actually the uncertainty range within that suggests it might be 1.5, but it might also be 2.4. So 1.5 is not a number we can just rest on and assume that's going to be fine. Next, I think it's important when we think about, okay, what happened at COP, it's important to think about, okay, well, what happened at previous COP and what has happened since, because it's not, the change doesn't come immediately. We're not immediately going to see the impact of COP26. But if we look back at, I mentioned Paris before, 2015, and think, well, what's happened since then? There's quite a lot that we can look back on. So there's been a clean tech innovation. There's been a lot more political resilience for sustainability and response to climate emergency. This idea of 1.5 has been normalized. This idea of net zero has been normalized. You know, both these ideas, which seem quite ubiquitous now, haven't always been like that. We've seen a real shift towards clean energy, and there's also been significant institutional change at a political level, at a business level. Not all of this is because of COP in 2015, but it reflects that we have come a long way since then. And by the time the next COP comes around next year, we will still have come a long way since before COP this year. Another example to reflect between COP26 and COP24 in 2018 is how much the science is more accepted now. So in COP24, there was a real effort from a number of countries to keep the IPCC's 1.5 report out of the formal text. But this year, it was front and center, right there on the first page, an acknowledgement of the science. And this is reflected in the academics I work with at the University of Exeter, saying there is a lot more acceptance of the science around the climate emergency. And that is hugely significant. And lastly, on this one, fossil fuels, you might have heard phrases like fossil fuels being described as toxic assets, and especially coal. Here are a couple of quotations on coal made during COP. One from Jennifer Morgan saying the era of coal is ending, and another one from the UK government's own press release saying the end of coal is in sight. Now, obviously, there's a significant difference between these words being said and these things happening, but this does mark a significant change. And it's not enough. We need to get there quicker, but this is significant. The way the language is being used is different, and it is significant. So another really useful thing I think that's come out of COP is a reflection on where we are around behavioural trends. And at a local level, I think this is really, really important. So first, thinking about behaviour change. If we look at the language that the UK government is using around behaviour change, both in its net zero strategy and around COP, these are the sort of things that they are saying. They want to go with the grain of existing behaviour and trends. Expecting the British public to forego holidays abroad would be an enormous political challenge. So what we're really seeing here is a delegation of responsibility for behaviour change. And we know that to reach our targets, we need significant change in how we live, how we consume, and that behaviour change has to come from somewhere. So at the moment, that responsibility is really being passed down to local government, to businesses, to community groups, because at the moment, national government want to bring a transition that feels painless to people. But we know that that's only going to get us so far. There are going to have to be changes. And the whole point is these are changes that are better than the alternative of not doing anything. But still that responsibility is falling at a local level. And it is complex. This is some recent data asking about people's personal efforts to preserve the planet. And you can see there's some interesting things coming out of here. So 46% of people say, I don't think I really need to change my habits. You know, and that's less than half. That's a significant number of people. There's quite a few people who are saying they need more guidance, more resources. They need more clarity. But also at the top, 76% of people say they would accept stricter rules and environmental regulations. So the kind of behavior change that is done to us rather than us doing ourselves. But significantly, this is the sort of behavior change that national government are making it clear that they're less likely to do, that sort of top-down approach. So there's a tension and a gap there that we need to be aware of. Also important to look at the global framing and how the way climate change is framed globally is changing and is trending. And this effectively boils down to who are we going to blame? Are we going to blame China? Are we going to blame India? If we look at some of the headlines that came out around COP, we see things around, okay, the Sun is trying to blame China, Russia, and India. In The Guardian, we have Alex Sharma talking about how India and China are to blame. And this trend towards putting the blame for failures in response to the climate emergency on other countries is not new, but it also doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. Every single country has its own barriers to responding to the climate emergency. You know, in India, they're trying to balance that with crippling poverty. In China, we export a lot of our emissions over to China. They produce a lot of the things that we consume over here. And in America, it's not as easy as drawing just lines around each country and saying, this is you and this is you. Also, a lot of the global emissions are from corporations who operate across borders and across countries. So this kind of language is deeply unhelpful, but it's not new. This is a cartoon from an American newspaper in 2015 after the Paris COP, basically saying that you know, India are to blame for getting in the way of our progress. And there's a implicit or explicit element of racism in a lot of these messages. And there's a real danger that this kind of messaging can bleed over into a local level as well. And it's something that I think we all need to be aware of as climate change becomes more and more conscious for people and they get more angry about it, they look for people to blame. These are the messages that they will be seeing at the moment. So we have to be really conscious of how we part of that, and is that something we're going to see at a local level, that apportioning of blame elsewhere. Next up, I want to say a little bit about climate adaptation. So this is something that there was a bit more at COP26 about, but still not very much. Our knowledge about how the climate change is going to affect us locally is rapidly outpacing our strategies and plans to respond to that. So we know a lot. So here's a map that you might well recognize. So this is showing the area of land in North Somerset that is projected to be below the annual flood level in 2050. So those red areas are the areas that are projected to be below the annual flood level. So we know much more detail about how we're going to be affected, but we don't yet know how we're going to respond to that. And it's not just about flooding and sea level rises. I don't have the data from North Somerset to hand, but this is a project that we've been doing at the University of Exeter in Cornwall, looking at the Met Office data of how Cornwall's climate is going to change over the next decades. Here's looking at the maximum temperature. So we're really going to see a steady increase in the maximum temperature and the minimum and the mean temperature. But this is really telling us a lot about heat waves we're going to see and how this is going to impact health. We can also look at precipitation, rainfall. The trend we're seeing here is for wetter winters and drier summers, which is clearly going to have impacts on agriculture and food production. It's going to have impacts on travel, how we move around. Also, lots of impacts on health as well. So we're getting better at this data, but there's still a gap in terms of what do we actually do with that. And that's an important gap that at the local level, again, local councils, local businesses, local communities are going to be the ones who are affected first, more so than national government, by the changes that are coming. And so we need to develop new understandings of what resilience means at a local level. I want to talk briefly about business incentives. I think it's really important to reflect what the state of play is for businesses at the moment. And two really important trends coming out of COP26. One around measurement and disclosure. So this is effectively, what are you doing and what have you already done? So we're seeing, this is just one graph I found from one organization, the New Climate Institute, looking at more and more businesses starting to disclose their emissions. So it is now the majority of businesses are doing this. So there's a real challenge here that businesses don't want to be left behind in terms of doing disclosing their emissions, doing the carbon footprinting, sharing their action plans. It's getting easier, but it's also getting more important. And there's more support for businesses to do that, but also businesses that don't will be left behind to some degree. So what support is there locally? What kind of capacity is there for business support? What kind of tools do we have locally to support businesses that haven't already done this to start doing it now? And the other thing about businesses is with everything I've spoken about around how the language is changing around fossil fuels, for example, we're seeing a significant de-risking for businesses to invest in sustainable behavior and activities. Here's a quote from the large consultancy firm McKinsey. Momentum has shifted towards net zero, providing businesses with a new organizing principle. So this is what they said after COP. It's a really significant thing for such a large organization to say, but really shows that it's still there's still a lot of risk associated with businesses doing something differently, but that risk is lower than not acting. And we're seeing kind of a tipping point having been reached for businesses to do that. So the risk of investing in clean energy, in sustainable practices is much, much lower now that these commitments and this new kind of language is being more commonly used across the world. I want to talk briefly about some sector-specific indicators that we're seeing. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because that detail is out there and you can just read it, and I'll share some links to it again. But some things I think are useful to sort of articulate where we're headed. So one of these is from the Glasgow Breakthrough. So this is something agreed at COP. This was 40 countries coming together to make agreements around 5 particular areas. Those include the UK, the US, China, India, Australia. And we're looking at 5 key areas. It's power, road transport, steel, hydrogen, and agriculture. So if you read these, you can see they're all framed around a vision of where we want to be by 2030. So again, there's nothing really that concrete about this. There's nothing really that tells you how this is going to happen. But I think this is a helpful roadmap to give you an idea of, right, this is where collectively across the world we are working towards. So this is a really significant indicator of where energy and investment and support is going to be put over the next 8-9 years. And more specifically, we can look at as well the net zero strategy that the UK government released and see how some of it is more specific and some of it is less specific. I've taken just 3 comparative sectors as an example here, looking at agriculture, which is obviously a significant source of emissions, but also a potentially significant source of solutions and carbon sinks. We still don't have a clear and credible strategy to address that. That still doesn't exist. That's a significant gap that really is especially affecting rural areas. Power, there's a lot of talk around the plans for a decarbonised power system by 2035. Talk about electrification and hydrogen. So it's kind of clear where we're headed on that one. And with road transport, again, you may well have heard about the commitments to end the sale of combustion engine cars and vans by 2030, and with more clarity on how that's going to happen. So support grants, infrastructure. We still don't know though how it's going to affect things like HGVs and coaches and motorbikes. So there's still some gaps in there as to how we're going to reach those points. So last thing I want to do before I finish is just summarize some of these key points. And I think that for me, the most useful things to come out of COP26 at a local level. So the first point is we do really need to focus on what has happened. And this isn't to say to celebrate it and to say it was enough and it's great and it was, it was everything we needed it to be. Realistically, it probably was never going to be more than it was, but we need to recognize what happens so that we can use that, we can grab the changes and use them to accelerate forward, because we really do need to accelerate. But the good thing about acceleration is it doesn't have to happen in a straight line. So one thing we can also do is start to notice where that potential for non-linear change is. So I'm talking about tipping points. The things that we're doing some research at the university around positive tipping points. So how the positive changes that we see, the conditions for those can come together and then the change can happen almost instantaneously, really, really quickly. So those are the things we've got to look for. So not get disheartened that things look like they're moving slowly, because change can happen very, very quickly once the conditions are right. So for example, we want to look at what are the opportunities for businesses, because these things move very, very quickly once the right details are in place. Do we have the capacity to support businesses locally to do what we know they need to do? And if not, how do we get that capacity? We really need to focus on behavior change. It's not all about individual actions by any count, but behavior change does make things a lot easier. It makes policy changes easier. It makes businesses changing their behavior easier, because the consumers have changed what they're looking for and changed how they operate. So behavior change is a key priority that at the moment is falling to us at a local level. And we also need to recognize the lines in the sand, like fossil fuels being described as toxic assets. That's a line we don't ever want to go back from. That's a line in the sand now, so we need to recognize those and keep pushing them forward. So reclaiming the victories and claiming the changes as they come and saying, right, well, we're going to keep forward, but we're not going back from these. Thirdly, yes, we need to do climate mitigation. It's really, really important that we reduce our emissions, but we also need to balance that with adaptation to the changes that we know are coming. And we need to think about resilience in a new way. Resilience is not all about having control over our environment. Some things we don't have control over. So understanding how do we adapt to the changes that we know are going to come. And there is still time to do that, but we really need to ramp that up. Fourthly, and this is, I think, an important opportunity, certainly I'm seeing in conversations with academics and scientists who are, who've been studying this work for years and are getting frustrated with the delay shown by a more national leadership and wanting to engage locally with practical impact, people who are doing things at a local level. So don't just mean at the University of Exeter, I mean, any kind of academic institution across the UK and potentially across the world. There's a huge resource there to find out, what's going to happen locally, what do we need to do, what's working, what's not working. That's something I think we can all tap into a bit more. And lastly, change is happening. It's very easy to be disheartened, and I totally get where that is coming from, but there is change happening, and we need to recognize that and act as though the next changes that are coming are inevitable, because they are inevitable. We just haven't quite got to the point where the political will is matching up to the technological ability and the scientific understanding. But those things are coming. There's no alternative to that. So if we can act now as though those things are just around the corner, then I think that will make that transition quicker and easier. Because we are now in a post-COP26 world, and right now it's not clear what that means or what that looks like, but that is where we are, and we will look back on this in a few years' time and recognize more clearly the changes that have happened. So this is where we need to act. We need to acknowledge what has happened, but now instead of looking back, look forward and think, right, well, what do we do now, and how do we move forward with the changes that we've seen?
Thanks ever so much, Peter. I think that was a really good way of framing our event today. And I'm hopeful as well that when you're picking up on things like what kind of support and capacity and tools have we got available to us locally, it'll be really interesting to see how we might learn about that through the conversations today. So please, everybody, if you are involved with things, if you've got support to offer, if you are already involved with projects, please do share those in the chat. It would be really, really useful to start understanding that better in North Somerset. We'll move to the panel. We've got a really a great panel for you today. We're delighted to be joined by a real diverse voice from across North Somerset, and we'll hear from Councillor Bridget Petty, Joel Kirby from the University Hospitals Bristol and Weston NHS, John Rattenbury from South West Energy Hub, and Jamie Kingscott from North Somerset, Avon Wildlife Trust, who's the North Somerset Rewilding Champions Project Manager. We've asked them to speak to three things broadly: the work that they and their organisation are doing and what's been done to date, and so any plans they might have as well. The outcomes from COP26 and the ones which feel most important to them at a local level. So hopefully we'll get to understand a little bit more about the local impact and opportunities that we as organisations and as interested individuals might start to be able to also integrate as well into our plans and actions. And then hopefully as well we'll start to get a broad understanding about the gaps in our knowledge and our capacity that we need in order to be able to address climate change locally as well, and what our capability is in order to be able to react to that and deliver our plans and actions too. So a very, very warm welcome to our panel. I'll invite each one to join us to the virtual stage one by one. They each have 5 minutes to give us their address. We'll run through them in order, and then any questions that you might have, please store them up. We should have time at the end for some clarification questions. If we don't for any reason, and if we run out of time because we find that the panel content is just too exciting, then please start to drop your questions into the chat. Anything we cannot get to, and we will try and do a roundup at the end, and in our follow-up following the event, we will then hopefully have a response for you then. So first of all, if I could ask Councillor Bridget Petty, who's Executive Member for Climate Emergency and Engagement at North Somerset Council, pleased to join us. Welcome, Bridget. I think you're on mute at the moment.
I was trying to be clever and get my slides ready, but not managing that multiple tasks. So if that's okay, I'm going to share some slides, and which just may take a little bit to get ready, but thanks for inviting me today. So hoping that my slides have now come up, and can you see it in presentation mode?
Yeah, we can see it in the right mode. That's great.
Okay, great, thank you. So, oh, I'm going to just have to minimise some of you. So I'm Bridget Petty. I'm the Cabinet Member for the Climate Emergency at North Somerset Council. And I found everything that Peter said really, really interesting, and I hope that I can bring that local perspective. And now my voice is gone. So I wanted to share, oh, sorry. So since I was elected in 2019, we also declared the climate emergency at that time, and the Rainbow administration was established. I'm going to reflect on where we go now and the gaps to address. This picture and this quote ties in the significance of accepting the science, both around climate change and also about species loss. So for me, some actions benefit us immediately, some when we are old, and some will benefit our children and beyond. This photo was taken at a local park this autumn where we were planting trees. And I tend to read it as, a society grows great when old men or women plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. Peter mentioned the increased acceptance of the science, and I think that's really important and visible both at COP and here in North Somerset. We're finding that more people are talking about the 1.5 degrees, and we're seeing an increasing in number of people and businesses trying to make those changes. People are talking about climate change more than ever, and they're coming to us and asking how to make their businesses more sustainable, and they're making difficult decisions more than ever before. Recently, Burnham Brewery wrote to us in the past month asking for support and how they could go about changing their fleet. From my experience, behaviour change was always our big thing, and it was good to see COP talking about it, but the UK government, in my mind, has got it wrong, and here is my perspective. So as Peter mentioned, the fact that they wrote saying that in the net zero strategy that we should go with the grain of existing behaviour and trends is just utterly unacceptable, because actually we can influence the significant behaviour change around diet and travel. We're trying to push, as a local authority, we're trying to push for an earlier target than the national government, with tiny stretched budgets and less power than central government has. But we're all very keen to do as much as we can, not just here in North Somerset, but across the UK. And we're working with other partners in the west of England and further afield on this. North Somerset Council also joined a network called the UK 100. And so we work together to lobby and support and raise and lobby government around those aspects. So a huge job ahead of us that we all are interested in doing, and we're keen to make sure that the narrative and the normalising of things that we all know that need to be done. I'm not sure if you've come across this before, but we refer to it as referencing the influence that a local authority can have. And I used to refer to it as spheres of influence. So when it comes to the work we have done so far to reduce emissions in North Somerset, we've done a huge amount, and in a number of areas, but I know it's still not enough. The local authority have many hats, many areas of influence, more than our own footprint: contracts, supply chains, placemaking, convening and engaging. We need to show the leadership. The council is responsible for about 1% of emissions, and in our area, hence taking a leadership role and helping others around us to make changes. Sorry. Peter mentioned the business incentives, and as you can see, there's a North Somerset Sustainable Business Club that has been established so that we can be there to help our local businesses. In North Somerset, 99% of businesses are SMEs, unlike big businesses who have their own sustainability teams or policy. We think that supporting our SMEs is an excellent way to focus. We've also established a Facebook group where people can share friendly ideas, and that's working really well. Internally, we've established something called, we've been using the carbon literacy to embed action across our area. So here we've got a couple of quotes. Thank you so much for leading the course. It was exponentially useful for my professional and personal life. Such a great course, and it really hit home for me, and I hope inspires everyone who participates to make changes. What a lovely job you have spreading this message. I'm so pleased that all types of people and all teams are engaging across North Somerset Council. Many thanks for this course. It's been very informative. I hope to make positive changes going forward based on knowledge rather than flaky foundation I was basing my ideas on. So for me, that course that we're offering, it brings the science and it brings the confidence, and the officers across our organisation in every day-to-day bits of their work are introducing climate change work, and they take that home to their home lives. In the past 12 months, we've really focused on transport because it's a huge issue. We have the M5 running through the middle, which helps and hinders travel, and in a mainly rural area, we're very reliant on our cars. Where national emissions have been coming slowly down, ours have been going slowly up. So we're investing heavily in our EV charging infrastructure. We're ensuring that our local plan looks at only the most sustainable locations. We're introducing road changes which will encourage people out of their cars. And we have lots of schemes for individuals and businesses to help them with walking and cycling, plus ensuring our new bus strategy is ambitious and better. I put this slide up because to me, to respond to the challenges we face with climate change can also support the council in addressing other critical issues facing our communities: health crisis, isolation and housing. Co-benefits are everywhere, and we look, but if we, co-benefits are everywhere we look. But if we fail, we continue to see failings across the board, with those least able likely to be impacted first and worst as climate change affects us all. What else do we need to do? Gaps in our capacity. Well, this slide highlights that building retrofit, renewable energy investment, climate adaptation, demanding targets, people demanding change. There is many aspects to address, but to be honest, I do think that we have the knowledge. I think that the officers have excellent training and access to quality research, but we don't have the capacity, finances, or mandate to address all of the needs at the pace needed. So everything is so important to address, and there is so much to change. And when you start a conversation on one thing, someone is always mentioning another area that you're not prioritizing or improving enough. I like this quote that I found yesterday, and I think this reflects what Peter also said. The past is not preparing us for the future. Resilience will not come from doing what we have always done. Time to act was yesterday. Today we must adapt. And also, just finally, yesterday I received an email from the co-leader of the Green Party, Adrian Ramsey, and actually I thought what he wrote was interesting. While the deal acknowledges the central, so from his reflecting on COP, while the deal acknowledges the central role of fossil fuels, it still fails to deliver real commitments for climate justice. And despite the disappointment and frustration at the weak COP outcomes, we know that we can strengthen the deal and push for action while the UK holds the presidency for another year. So I just thought reflecting on the fact that we still have that presidency is quite an interesting point to continue to think about and how we can push that. Thank you. Sorry, whirlwind.
Bridget, that was great. Thank you very much. And very interesting to hear how the efforts that are being put into North Somerset Council as well about bringing your training your staff in how to talk about carbon is such an important skill to be able to have. And many other interesting points as well raised too there, not only the communication, but talk about co-benefits, and also the sense I understand that, you know, we all have a part to play actually in this, and it's not only just the role of the North Somerset Council. Could we go now please to Joel Kirby? Joel is Energy and Sustainability Manager at the University Hospitals Bristol and Weston NHS Foundation Trust. Thanks very much for joining us today, Joel.
No problem. Hi guys, yeah, my name's Joel. I work at across Bristol and Weston. Our IT network unfortunately doesn't let me share slides, so Peter's going to do that for me. I've got a few for you. So I'm just going to really briefly go through sort of what we're doing at a trust level to have our impact and what we're doing for climate action, and also potentially what COP26 means for us. So I think initially, obviously, as an NHS trust, the last year has been like none other. Really, the continuing impacts and pressures of COVID-19 have made it really, really difficult. And this year, although they've remained, we've tried to develop our sustainability ambition for the NHS, both locally and nationally. We're starting to notice a shift as well in people's opinion of climate change more and more, and they tend to be sharing more and more ideas. And I think this is probably one of the biggest successes of COP26, definitely in this country. We've got a lot more people getting involved. They want to understand and they want to share their ideas as well, which is really helpful. We've noticed across trust. Peter mentioned obviously that the change in climate will impact people's health across our local area, but nationally and internationally as well. And I think that's one of the biggest impacts for us as a trust, and one of the main reasons why we need to not only adapt but have our own impact on our climate strategy, both nationally again, but for the international picture. So we pride ourselves, I think, on being one of the most sustainable healthcare providers in the world. And we were one of the first trusts in the UK to declare a climate emergency and net zero target for 2030. We published our sustainable development strategy as well at the beginning of last year, which focused on not only our direct emissions, but also plans for our indirect emissions as well. If you go next slide, Peter. So I've really quickly put up sort of our brief plan for our sort of our direct operational emissions. This covers a wide range of things. Over the last sort of year, we've had about £17.5 million in funding for decarbonisation. We've targeted this on our district heating across our Bristol hospitals, a lot of control upgrades, solar PV that we're installing at the moment actually at our Weston General Hospital, as well as heat pumps. And we're trying to electrify everything as much as possible to really reduce our scope 1 and 2 direct emissions. This hopefully will have about 2,600 tonnes of CO2 annually across the next 10 years. So that should have a big impact on our emissions. I think some of the biggest impacts or issues for us around net zero 30 target is our gas usage. Electrifying our estate will inadvertently or directly double or triple our electricity consumption. It's a major issue in North Somerset around capacity, so we're really focusing on at the moment. And I think in terms of health, apart from the fact that climate is really impacting people's health generally, we need to really start thinking about how things like anesthetic gases, which have a massive global warming potential, can be reduced or changed to have an impact as well. And we've tried to reduce the use of nitrous across our trust to try and reduce those impacts, but also by electrifying our fleet. Around 300 people are estimated to die annually through air quality just in our catchment area for our trust. So again, this is a big impact that we're trying to get on top of. Next slide, please. So I mentioned really briefly about our direct emissions, but if you have a look in this graph, the blue line represents our supply chain. And I think this is where COP26 really does have an impact locally for us, because it's not just about what we do as an organization to reduce our emissions. We really do need local businesses and our supply chain to decarbonize at the same rate. And I think COP26 really does start to do that by putting the onus on businesses to really report and think about their own emissions. I mean, you can see our direct emissions, scope 1 and 2, have gone down quite considerably over the last 10 years or so. But our scope 3 emissions have almost continued to increase, which just tells you the direction of travel. Next slide, please. And really quickly, just to finish, I thought I'd put up sort of on a national picture the NHS Procurement Strategy as we move towards 2045. Obviously, this is beyond our personal target or our local target of 2030. So we've got quite a lot to do to push forward at that, towards that. And I think there's large incentives for local businesses if they want to work with the NHS over the next sort of 10 years. There will be a requirement for them to decarbonise at a similar rate to try and sort of accelerate our reduction of carbon emissions and impact on the climate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joel, and thank you as well for sharing such detail about the plans that you're involved with locally in North Somerset and beyond. Ellie in the chat also commented on that, saying it's a demonstration of what large organisations can achieve with planning and investment, and thank you very much for sharing. It's interesting, isn't it, as well, just looking at not only your own carbon emissions and footprint, but also that of your suppliers and your procurement and how you procure things, and that's an interesting conversation in itself, I know, about how you can make decisions about how you procure things in organisations of any size, and still help reduce your carbon. I would like now please to invite John Rattenbury, who's the Programme Manager for South West Energy Hub, to the stage. John, over to you.
Great, thanks, Linda. So thanks for inviting me along to talk to everybody today. So I've got a set of slides, but I'm going to just talk through the 5 minutes and then share my slides afterwards, as kind of conscious that sometimes you can get lost in the slides. So they'll come out afterwards. So the South West Energy Hub is hosted by the West of England Combined Authority. We are one of 5 energy hubs across England. We're funded by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, but I don't represent them today. We're just funded by them. We're a partnership of 7 local enterprise partnerships across the wider Southwest, so from Cornwall up to Gloucestershire and out to sort of Southampton, Isle of Wight and Portsmouth. We've been set up to help organisations locally to identify and develop local energy projects. So the reason why is that currently there are 74% of local authorities and about 8 combined authorities have declared climate emergencies over the last kind of couple of years. So that shows there's a real kind of groundswell of local action and local desire to tackle the climate emergency going forward. What often is the problem is the lack of resources, a lack of know-how, a lack of finance to kind of move projects through the development phases. So when we consider the local energy and the local net zero project delivery jigsaw, there's a whole raft of different activities and tasks that are required to kind of move projects forward. What we're saying is, like, in terms of having a strategy, when it comes to actually delivering against that, you need kind of projects that are going to achieve the aims of the strategy. And so that requires enabling activity, it requires feasibility, it requires options appraisal, funding, and designing and everything like that. So we're here to sort of try and help support that journey. The way we're set up is that we support locally, but we also interact with government centrally. So we're kind of a regional conduit for local and national action, and we work across different sectors: public sector, private sector, third sector. We are there to identify and increase the number and quality of projects, and also to help areas attract finance for projects, share good practice, support collaboration between areas, and also to provide some kind of regional leadership in terms of, feeding back into central government what's happening locally and what some of the challenges are locally. We've got a number of programs that we run to do this. So our local capacity support program is where we work with local authorities principally, or other kind of local organizations, by providing the resources of our team to help identify and develop those projects. We also run the Rural Community Energy Fund, which is a grant-based program for community groups, where we provide up to £40,000 for feasibility work on potential projects, and then potentially a further £100,000 for development costs towards projects. So again, this is kind of supporting that bottom-up activity where local areas, communities want to take some kind of control, want to kind of take a leading role in sort of trying to address the kind of climate emergency and the challenges set by COP26. We're also delivering a Green Homes Grant program where we're helping to get the properties that are worst performing in terms of energy performance and lived in by people on low incomes to improve the quality of those properties, to reduce the energy costs and the impacts of the energy at those properties. And then furthermore, we are also delivering what's called our public sector decarbonisation programme, where we're supporting the wider public sector to understand its own estate, develop decarbonisation plans, and then support them in securing funding to address those kind of plans and start to make improvements. So across the region, and this is kind of similar for North Somerset as elsewhere, there are a number of challenges, and a number of these are kind of aligned with some of the outcomes of COP, particularly considering the Energy Transition Council and some of their kind of key mission statements and strategic priorities for 2022. So they talked about integrated energy planning. So delivering energy that in a way that kind of maximizes effectiveness, efficiency, socio-economic benefits, and emissions reductions. Bringing scale to projects so that attracts private finance. So, going beyond just an individual project, but actually thinking about those kind of place-based solutions. And Bridget talked about place shaping. And so we're thinking about, okay, what are those place-based solutions for energy and net zero that are looking at multi-technology approaches, that are looking at planning, that are going beyond just a single kind of technology solution. Obviously supporting the transition away from coal by supporting more renewables and more development. Thinking about the electricity grid and the gas grid. So it's all great to kind of produce lots of electricity, but it has to be supplied to the grid, and the grid is already kind of fairly constrained in the southwest and North Somerset area. So we work with the grid operators to understand that and understand what can be done to support future development of energy projects. And then energy efficiency. So as I mentioned, delivering work to improve the housing stock, both in the low income sector, but also in the able to pay market, understanding what the building archetypes are, what the needs are of those people in those houses, and how we can develop solutions that help to address those needs by improving energy efficiency, which can help deliver globally kind of 40% of greenhouse gas emissions over time. So we do that through supporting options appraisals of projects, developing business cases, design and planning and financing. And across the region, we've supported a number of projects. So we've supported electric vehicle infrastructure charging projects, which is a key area that was mentioned earlier as something that's been taken in North Somerset. We're working with councils who are trying to develop net zero policy targets and policies for their planning documents. So providing them with the evidence and helping them to support those their sort of planning documents. We're supporting several projects that are looking to develop solar photovoltaics, and some of those including battery storage or other kind of mixes of measures. And we're working with the grid operators in the west of England to help them understand the impacts of the strategic master planning that's happening in the area, particularly around Northern Fringe and Southwest Bristol, and what that means for the grid and how the grid can develop and adapt to the requirements going forward. So we have a range of different kind of projects and technologies that we support across the region, and we're working with North Somerset Council as much as possible as well to support them in their transition and their kind of climate emergency ambitions. So with our Rural Community Energy Fund, we have provided over £1 million worth of grants to local community energy groups. And we are currently working with BEIS to hopefully kind of develop a successor fund to that as an outcome of the recent spending review, and to help deliver the net zero, one of the kind of requirements of the net zero strategy. Hopefully we'll see something on that over time. Some of the grants we've given through the Community Energy Fund, for example, is Dorset Community Energy's Energy Local Bridport, where they're looking at how they can supply local renewable energy to businesses at lower prices than they get from the standard kind of central supply. We worked with TRESOP, Totnes Community Land Trusts, and Totnes Renewable Energy Society to help them with their eco-housing development and how they can combine high levels of building fabric, solar generation, a microgrid that means they kind of manage all the kind of generation within the kind of the development, and then looking at the potential for future electric vehicle charging and battery storage at the site. And then a further project that we've funded includes Bath and West Community Energy, who are testing the viability of community-owned electric vehicle charging networks running on solar power. So these are just some examples of energy projects that we've supported that have been developed by community groups, which is often where some of the innovations, some of the good ideas come from. And so hopefully we might see some more coming through from North Somerset in the near future. I think that's probably my time, so I'll stop there if that's okay.
John, thank you. That was really interesting. I think as well, for me, what I understand from what you're sharing is that actually the diversity of the networks that are involved in trying to identify solutions to climate change as well locally, not only from householders and community through to community groups and local authorities and probably tech organizations as well. So it's I'm not covering them all, but it's kind of demonstration of the diversity of networks and people that are actually involved in getting together. And
absolutely, it takes lots of different actors acting, lots of different kind of organizations to kind of move this agenda forward.
Lovely, that's great. Thanks very much for your contribution. On to our final speaker, Jamie Kingscott. Hi, Jamie.
Hello.
Jamie is North Somerset Rewilding Champions Project Manager for Avon Wildlife Trust.
It's a snappy title, isn't it? It is. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you guys. Oh, hang on, it's been disabled for me at the moment. If I can be allowed. Marvellous. Let's try again. Thank you very much. Lovely. I've moved, you might have noticed if you're eagle-eyed amongst you, I've actually moved around the room twice to try and get some good lighting, but you're going to be looking at the slides, not me. Anyway, hello everybody. I've just realised that this isn't going to work. Hang on a second. Can you see that okay?
Yes, it's not in, oh, there we go. Now it's in presentation.
Oh, it's full screen.
There you go.
Okay, not to worry. So, as I said, I'm Jamie. I work for Avon Wildlife Trust. I'll just give you a little brief overview of what we do as a trust, if you're not aware of us. So we're one of 46 wildlife trusts nationally. We cover the area that was once called Avon, so Northern Somerset, Southern Gloucestershire, and Bristol in the middle. You've probably heard of that. We cover about 30 nature reserves across the area, which includes ancient woodlands and some nationally important wetlands too. Our aim is to create a connected sort of living landscape across the whole area. Now that's what we've been doing so far, but more recently, very recently, in fact, a couple of weeks back, we've just launched our new 10-year strategy, which should take us up to 2030, and it's focused on these three main aims. So first of all, is nature's recovery. The UK, as I'm sure you'll probably know, is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. 189th, I think we were ranked in an index of biodiversity intactness, which isn't very good. So we're hoping to change that, and we're going to aim for 30% of land and sea being managed for the benefit of wildlife by 2030. The second of our aims, and this really centers around that behavior change that we've talked a lot about, and I'll talk a little bit more about it coming up, is that we want to get 1 in 4 people taking action for nature. And then finally, we're all about nature-based solutions to tackling this climate crisis. And obviously that comes down to how we manage our land and the land that we own as a trust, and also those landowners we work with. If you've got woodland, which everybody famously knows is great for, you know, storing carbon, but we're also, I'm very pleased to see this increase in scientific awareness applying to things like wetlands and those sorts of habitats and their value for storing carbon. So here's a little brief glimpse at this nature recovery network that we've got in our area and that we're aiming to create. So this forms part of a national recovery network, and you might see some familiar little places in and amongst there. It's all about creating and restoring really, really valuable habitats and environments and connecting all of those up. Having these stronger, larger and more connected wild populations makes all these species that bit more resilient to climate change. It's important to remember, and certainly a big focus for us at the Trust is that climate change will impact all species, not just us. So having these healthier populations and a more connected living landscape is really, really important for building that sort of climate resilience, and also having this connected landscape of habitats and various different environments is important for building our own sort of resilience, and as I said before, can provide some natural climate solutions. So everybody's very aware about trees being able to lock up carbon, and we've been talking about tree planting for decades, but it's really nice to see people talking more and more about the value of other habitats like wetlands for storing that sort of carbon. One of the main features of the North Somerset area are the levels and moors. I'm sure you've all seen them. We've got several reserves on there. I think we've got 3 across the levels and moors, and not only do they support significant wildlife populations of lapwings and other things like that, which is all very nice, and we're hoping to help those species to, you know, be stronger and more resilient in the face of the changes that are inevitably coming now. But they're really, really important for storing carbon. As those generations of plants grow and die off, they store carbon, lock it away in that soil. As long as it stays wet, then that's a great way of storing carbon and sequestering it into the ground. Now, the big thing I'm going to talk about really is that 1 in 4, that behaviour change. You may or may not be aware that there was a study from 2018 which identified a tipping point of 25%. 25% of people in a population, once they get hold of an idea or a particular change, then that's a tipping point to beyond which it very quickly starts to become a social norm. So that's what we've adopted as part of our strategy going forward, is to aim to get 25% of people in our area taking action for nature. There is that need for behaviour change, and if national government are talking about going with the flow, carrying on with the, you know, with the way things are going, well, I agree with Bridget and a few others that have said about it. I don't think that's good enough. So on a local scale, we really do need to be encouraging this, and that's something that North Somerset Council have recognised already, which brings me to the project I've been working on with them. So North Somerset Council, as Bridget mentioned, have been making great efforts to combat the climate crisis and the ongoing biodiversity loss that we're suffering at the moment. They've made the decision to rewild 25% of their amenity grassland. In some places, that's a case of reducing the amount of management that goes on these grasslands. So moving from, in some places, fortnightly mows to 1 cut a year, which has made a stark difference in 1 summer. We're only looking at early results yet, but by the end of the project, we should hopefully see some really, really impressive results in terms of the increase in biodiversity that's come about. In other places, there have been trees planted, and once those trees are planted, those areas are not cut, they're left to grow wild, which is fab. And that's all about this creating and connecting habitats. It's boosting biodiversity and it's building that resilience that I've talked about. But a really big part of this project is about engaging communities. It's something we do a lot at the Wildlife Trust, and that's why we're involved. So not only are we monitoring the changes in biodiversity that come about from these changes, but we're offering free training for local people to come out, get engaged with these green spaces, help us survey, help us do that monitoring. And we're looking to identify local champions who can in turn sort of proliferate that change through their communities moving forward. I'm aware I may well have flown through that, actually. That 5 minutes flew by, if that was 5 minutes. So to summarize my points, really, I would argue that we've all felt quite a bit of disappointment from COP. I think there's a lot of hype about it, and we all got very, very excited, and I think that excitement is still there. And there's still a few gaps in what came of it. But rather than wait on the governments and these targets, which we may or may not agree with or may be disappointed with, I think it's really, really crucial that we do act locally, and that's what we're doing as a Wildlife Trust. The council has started to do it. Everybody you're hearing from today is starting to act locally. I say starting, some of them have been at it for years, and that's really, really important. The acceptance of these issues, the awareness of these issues is certainly increasing. We've noticed it on the ground with the people that I talk to the volunteers that come to my survey sessions and my training sessions, they're there because they're aware of the issues we face, and they care, and they all want to do something about it. Now this next slide, this has been shown already today, but this is not 2050, this is 2030. The predicted annual flood level, the areas in red there will be below that annual flood level by 2030. That's from Climate Central, based on the leading consensus from the IPCC this year. That's quite stark, that's quite frightening perhaps. Many of you may well live in that red area or know plenty of people who do. That can have quite an impact, as you can imagine. Zooming out across the area, I live down towards Bridgewater. All the way down this coastline, we're going to see some quite stark effects of climate change in the not too distant future. 2030 is not a million miles away. So it's really, really important that we are taking this sort of action. And most importantly, I think this is the key. I might get this on a t-shirt. It's to think globally, and that's what we have been doing with all the talk of COP26. But what we can do is act locally, and I'll leave it there.
Jamie, thank you very, very much. I think what was striking for me is to see and understand how important it is that people are engaged. The success of addressing climate change is actually in how we address people in delivering action and making better decisions and changing their behaviours and things like that. So, and getting involved in the work that you are doing, connecting with nature and teaching and understanding themselves what they can be doing for themselves locally as well. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you all very much for your contributions to the breakout room discussions. Ours was very rich and in content and subject, so I hope you experienced the same in yours. We are going to start to bring our event to a conclusion now. And in order to start doing that, I'd like to invite the panel members to offer their reflections on what we have covered today, the key points that they might want to take away with them. And I think that might be very, very useful in helping us conclude the event. Could I ask Councillor Bridget Petty, please, if she'd be willing to offer some of her thoughts first?
Sure. Oh, I wrote it down somewhere else and that's gone. I thought it was actually, I remember Peter said quite early on that the academics are potentially feeling frustrated, like they've known the science for a while, they've been talking about it, and they want to take more action. And I was like, ooh, I do want to be working more together with the universities on, on action. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity. So I hope that we can find ways to keep exploring that. I think that Jamie was right in saying that 25% of people, that once they get it, then you've become this social norm. And COVID had that time where people got back to nature and they realized there's different priorities, preciousness, and connected with nature. So I still think that that is a great pull for North Somerset residents. And then I feel like we kind of all move towards renewable energy, and it remains a really big opportunity in my mind because the grid has not got the capacity, but smaller projects are really viable. So how do we bring our community, but equally as North Somerset, take that forward? So I think those are probably my 3 summary points that stuck with me. Lots of really good content, and thank you for talking about it.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Bridget. Very valuable contribution and very useful. Thank you. Joel, could I ask you, so Joel from University Hospital Bristol and Weston NHS.
Yeah, so I think it's very clear it's climbing a lot higher on people's agendas, which is really great news. And I think there's been a general consensus as well that we do need to focus on behaviours more than the government is actually picking up on. And people genuinely want to understand a little bit more and understand what they can potentially do to make a difference. I think there's potentially quite a lot of information being chucked at people that isn't well explained, especially in the media. When you hear things like heat pumps and things like that, people don't fully understand exactly what the implications are of some of these larger projects on them and how it affects their climate footprint and what they can actually do. And sometimes the smaller changes are better than these big scale changes that people can't always afford. And I think we need to understand a little bit more from people on what smaller projects or bigger projects they want to do. And I think we need a bit more community engagement for projects as well. Definitely from my side definitely from Weston, in terms of North Somerset, it would be good to understand whether there are some community projects that people can get involved with, but also public sector organisations like the NHS can get involved with as well to try and help them happen with the council.
And Jamie Kingscott, please, from North Somerset Rewilding Champions, Project Manager at Avon Wildlife Trust.
Hello. Yeah, I think similar to what other people have said. For one, I've been quite impressed, which I think is a good thing, by hearing about what everybody's doing, what various organisations and businesses are doing, and the way things are moving. I think it's arguably typical of events like this when we all get together and chat very excitedly and positively and progressively about these things, that one does come away feeling sort of reassured and think, no, we'll be all right. We are going in the right direction. But I think, particularly from our breakout room, one of the biggest points that I think, it's one of those things where only through talking about it with other people do you realise something that's quite obvious, is that the impacts of climate change, of what we're up against on our local area, could perhaps be much better communicated. I think we look at these quite stark facts and figures. We talked about those maps that myself and Peter both showed, and they're quite stark. The imagery there is quite stark, and it should be, because it is. And I wonder whether that's something moving forward that we can adapt how we communicate things with people. You've got to be very careful about it. We established that in our breakout room, but that's one of the biggest things I think I'm taking away with me, is that the communication could perhaps be more urgent. Having things in places where those of us who are interested can go and find them is one thing, but maybe we need to start putting some of this much really quite serious information out there about the realities that we might be facing, and don't worry how we're going to adapt, that sort of thing. That's the probably the biggest thing I'm taking away from today.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Jamie, for sharing your thoughts.
Just before I hand over to Linda to wrap up, I just want to say thank you so much for everyone for coming, and say very briefly about the work that I'm doing at the University of Exeter, and I'll share more information about this in the follow-up email. So I'm setting up a project called the Green Futures Network, which is effectively a way for communities, businesses, local authorities to better engage with the climate and environmental work that we're doing at the University of Exeter. Because there's a lot of great stuff there, but often it's very inaccessible, it's hard to understand, it's hard to find. So I'm trying to make that more clear, more accessible, more usable as well on the ground for people like you who are actually doing stuff out there, outside of the sort of slight academic bubble that I can sometimes feel a part of. So it's really nice to be in a space like this. So for me, thank you so much for everyone who's shared, and I'll hand back over to Linda.
And a big thank you as well to you, Peter, from us and your fellow compatriots at the University of Exeter for spending your time on putting together such great content and review of what happened at COP26. It was a great way of framing our discussion today and helping us understand what's ahead of us and what we have to do next. Just to kind of sum up a few things I think have come out of today. I think certainly going back to Bridget's point about the opportunity to work with our great institutions and corporate and public sector and private sector organisations in this area that we should be making more use of. It's great then as well to hear Joel from the NHS say that how do we as community organisations too engage better with organisations such as the NHS and the universities too. So there's ways and offers there would be really useful to explore locally, I think, in terms of how we can work better, work smarter together, work more innovatively together, to deliver on what I feel has been quite a positive reception and conveyance of the ideas that we should be working better, smarter and more innovatively together today. So thank you very much for all of your inputs, everybody. I do like the fact that we've ended on with our poll there as kind of backed up what Jamie was saying about we can be reassured that things are happening on the ground. I think we all have a role, it feels like, to play in communicating what is happening and communicating that clearly. But also as well, it feels a message has come out today is looking at how we galvanise those people who are doing action, who are doing things on the ground, who are doing things in their own organisations, and how we work and communicate better, and how we work better together. So I think it's been a really, really useful event. Thank you all so much for all of your time. Thank you all so much for your contributions. As Peter was saying, we will be in touch afterwards with a recording of this event and a link to the Jamboard, so you can revisit that as well post-event. Please do keep in touch. The Burnham and Weston Energy as well will be looking at our community benefit fund and what we can be doing better with that, and how we can be targeting that in the very near future. So we'd like to hear people's thoughts, and we would like to be in touch with you to hear what you have to say, and for you to feed into that process, and also just tell us more about what you would like to be able to spend money on in the community. So please do drop your name in the chat if you want to hear more about that, or we'll be in touch if you're happy, if you tick the box to say we can be in touch with you, and look out for more opportunities as well. Reach out please to all the organisations here, the community, the businesses, other organisations who have such a lot to offer and who have shown themselves today to be very, very interested in working with us all. So that's great news. Thank you very much for such a positive, forward-looking event. Very, very pleased with all contributions, and please do keep in touch with us. We look forward to hearing from you again soon. Thanks, everybody.